The cacophony of a gymnasium, a symphony of squeaking sneakers, rhythmic pounding of rubber on polished maple wood, and the breathless shouts of teenagers died a sudden, unnatural death. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavier, more profound than any sound. It was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed down on everyone, originating from the colossal figure of Coach Harrison as he stood, arms crossed, in the center of the court. His gaze, like a predator's, was locked on a single, undersized player. That player was 12-year-old Jamal Walker. Just a moment ago, he was alive, electric, weaving through cones with a basketball that seemed an extension of his own arm. Now he was frozen, a statue of dread, as the coach began a slow, deliberate walk toward him. Every step of Harrison's pristine, $1,000 Nike LeBrons squeaked with an authority that echoed in the cavernous space. The team, a pack of boys who just seconds before were his peers, parted like the Red Sea, their eyes, a mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and for some, cruel amusement, all fixed on the impending execution. Harrison stopped directly in front of Jamal, close enough for the boy to smell the acrid mix of stale sweat and expensive, musky cologne. The man didn't speak. He simply let the silence stretch, tightening the knot of anxiety in Jamal's stomach. Then, with theatrical slowness, his eyes traveled down from Jamal's face, past the worn-out practice jersey, until they rested on his feet. A low, guttural sound, something between a chuckle and a growl, rumbled in the coach's chest. "Walker," he began, his voice deceptively soft, yet carrying to every corner of the silent gym. "What are those?" His thick finger, adorned with a gaudy championship ring, jabbed downward. He wasn't pointing at shoes. He was pointing at a tragedy. They had once been a proud pair of Adidas, perhaps, or maybe Reeboks, but their lineage was now lost to time and abuse. The original white leather was a battlefield of scuffs, grime, and peeling layers, revealing the gray fabric beneath. The soles, once bouncy, were flattened and yellowed with age, cracked near the ball of the foot like dry earth. But the true horror, the centerpiece of the humiliation, were the gaping holes. On both sneakers, the toe boxes had been worn clean through, exposing Jamal's socks and, in one spot, the tip of his big toe. Holding the entire dilapidated structure together were frantic, crisscrossing strips of shimmering silver duct tape, a desperate, ugly solution to inevitable decay. A wave of heat, potent and suffocating, washed over Jamal. It started in his gut and exploded upwards, flooding his face, his neck, his ears. He could feel the blood pounding in his temples. He prayed for the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He could hear the snickers now, stifled at first, then growing bolder. Kyle, the team captain and Harrison's pet, let out an undisguised laugh. "I asked you a question." Harrison's voice sharpened, snapping Jamal from his internal spiral of shame. The coach crouched down, bringing his face level with Jamal's waist, examining the shoes as if they were a disgusting insect. "Did you find these in a dumpster? Are you conducting some kind of science experiment on advanced decomposition? Because there is no other logical reason for this filth to be on my court." He stood up, a sneer of pure contempt twisting his features. He began to pace around Jamal, addressing the rest of the team as if Jamal were an inanimate object on display. "Look closely, gentlemen. This is a lesson, a very important lesson. You see this?" He gestured dramatically at Jamal. "This is what a lack of respect looks like. This is what a lack of pride looks like. This is what a lack of commitment looks like." Jamal's vision blurred. The bright gymnasium lights fractured into 1,000 tiny stars. "Don't cry. Don't you dare cry." He bit the inside of his cheek, The sharp pain, a welcome distraction from the crushing weight of public disgrace. Basketball is not a game for beggars. Harrison suddenly roared, the sound slamming into Jamal like a physical blow. It's a sport of kings. It requires discipline. It requires investment. It requires a certain standard. He stopped and pointed at his own feet. You see these? These are LeBron 21s. They cost more than your family's grocery bill for a month. Not because I'm rich, but because I respect the game. I respect myself, and I respect this team. He turned his piercing gaze back to Jamal. And then you waltz in here with these rags wrapped in tape. You think that's acceptable? You think you can just desecrate this floor, this sacred space for athletes, with your poverty? The word hung in the air. Poverty. It was a clinical, brutal diagnosis of his entire life, laid bare for everyone to see. The coach took a final step forward, his towering frame blocking out the light. With a look of utter disgust, he used the tip of his immaculate sneaker to nudge Jamal's duct-taped shoe. It wasn't a kick, it was worse. It was a dismissive, contemptuous push, the way one would move a piece of trash with their foot. Jamal stumbled backward, his already fragile composure shattering. So here's the ultimatum, Walker, Harrison announced, his voice booming with finality. I'm giving you one chance. You go home, and you get yourself a pair of decent, respectable basketball shoes. I don't care how you do it. Beg, borrow, steal, that's your problem. You either come back here looking like a ball player, or you don't come back at all. We're done here. This is not a charity. This is a basketball team. He clapped his hands sharply, the sound like a gunshot. Practice is over. Get out, all of you. The team scattered, a murmuring, shuffling herd of footsteps moving toward the locker room. No one made eye contact with Jamal. They scurried past him, their averted eyes a final confirmation of his complete and utter isolation. He stood alone in the center of the vast, empty court. The echo of the slamming locker room door was the only sound. A single, hot tear finally escaped his control, tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. It fell, landing with a silent splash on the silver duct tape, a tiny, glistening monument to his humiliation. The story of those shoes, those tattered remnants of leather and tape, didn't begin in the echoing silence of the school gymnasium. It began 3 hours earlier, in a cramped, two-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator had been out of order for 6 months. The air in the apartment smelled of lemon-scented cleaning fluid and the lingering aroma of the burnt toast Jamal had eaten for breakfast. Sunlight, filtered through thin, yellowing curtains, illuminated the dust motes dancing over a small wooden table. On that table sat a pile of overdue bills, electric, water, a final notice from the medical clinic, each one a silent, paper-thin monster threatening their fragile peace. Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, the duct tape he'd found in the super's discarded toolbox resting on his lap. He looked at his sneakers. To Coach Harrison, they were filth. To Jamal, they were the last tangible connection he had to a world that made sense. Just one more practice, Dad, Jamal whispered, his voice barely audible. Just get me through one more. These shoes, original Adidas superstars, once priced at $85 at the local mall, had been a gift for his 11th birthday. His father, Marcus, had worked double shifts at the warehouse for 3 weeks to afford them. Marcus had been a legend in these streets, a man who could fly on the court and whose smile could light up the darkest alley. He had taught Jamal that basketball wasn't just a game. It was a way out, a way up. But Marcus was gone. A tragic accident at that same warehouse 18 months ago had stolen him away, leaving behind only a jersey, a worn-out basketball, and these shoes. For Jamal, the shoes weren't just footwear. They were a talisman. When he wore them, he felt his father's strength in his stride and his father's precision in his shot. The tape was a necessity born of desperation. His mother, Elena, was 42 but looked 60. She worked 12-hour shifts as a nurse's assistant, making $14.50 an hour, hardly enough to cover the $1,200 rent and the mounting debts Marcus's passing had left behind. Jamal had seen her crying over a $60 grocery receipt last week, wondering if they could afford eggs and milk in the same month. He couldn't ask for $150 basketball shoes. He wouldn't. "Jamal, you still here, baby?" Elena walked into the room, her uniform wrinkled, her eyes rimmed with the red haze of exhaustion. She had just finished a night shift. She saw the tape in his hand and the shoes on the floor. A flicker of pain crossed her face, the sharp, stabbing guilt of a parent who wants to give the world to their child but can only offer a small apartment and a tired hug. "I could try to save some from next week's check." "Honey," she said softly, sitting beside him, "maybe we can go to the outlet mall. I saw some Nikes on sale for $45. Jamal forced a smile, the kind of smile that hurts your soul to produce. "No way, Ma. These are lucky. Dad gave them to me, remember? They've got at least another season in them. The tape actually makes them more aerodynamic." He laughed, a hollow sound, and she pulled him into a hug. He could smell the antiseptic of the hospital on her skin. He hated that she had to work so hard. He promised himself right then, as he wrapped another layer of silver tape around the crumbling toe box, that he would become so good that she would never have to work again. He envisioned a future where he'd buy her a house with a garden, a BMW in the driveway, and a closet full of clothes that didn't come from a thrift store. "I'm going to make the varsity team, Ma," he said into her shoulder. "Coach Harrison says I've got the best handles in the 8th grade. If I keep this up, the scouts will start coming. High school ball is just the beginning. I know you will, Jamal. Your father is watching you. He's so proud." As he walked out the door toward the school, the silver tape glinted in the afternoon sun. He felt like a warrior putting on his armor. He didn't see the holes or the dirt. He felt the $85 investment his father had made, an investment in his future. He didn't know that in 90 minutes, that same armor would be used by a man in $300 shoes to strip him of his dignity. He didn't know that the world of $5,000 suits and $100,000 cars was about to collide with his world of duct tape and prayers in the most brutal way possible. He just knew he had to play, because for a boy with nothing, the court was the only place he felt like he had everything. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the school's asphalt parking lot. Jamal should have gone home. He should have crawled into his bed, pulled the covers over his head, and let the darkness of his room swallow the memory of Harrison's voice. But there was a spark of defiance buried deep beneath the layers of his shame, a stubborn, irrational hope that if he just explained, if he just made the coach understand why those shoes mattered, things would change. It was the evening of the Lincoln Heights Athletic Gala, an annual event where the school's wealthiest donors, local business owners, and board members gathered to celebrate the program's success. It was a sea of luxury. Sleek black Teslas and humming Mercedes-Benzes lined the driveway. Men in tailored navy blazers and women wearing silk scarves and smelling of expensive French perfumes moved toward the gymnasium, which had been transformed into an elegant banquet hall. Jamal stood at the edge of the parking lot, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had tried to clean himself up. He'd scrubbed his face until it was raw and tucked his worn jersey into his faded jeans. He had even added a fresh layer of duct tape to his shoes, trying to make the silver strips look neat, as if such a thing were possible. He saw Coach Harrison near the grand entrance, looking every bit the successful mentor. He was wearing a sharp, charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Elena's annual health insurance premium. On his wrist, a Rolex Submariner glinted under the halogen lights. its sapphire crystal catching every ray of light. He was holding a glass of sparkling cider, laughing loudly with a man who owned three of the city's largest car dealerships. Coach Harrison, Jamal's voice was a fragile thread, nearly lost in the chatter of the arriving guests. Harrison didn't hear him, or perhaps he chose not to. Jamal took a hesitant step forward, crossing the invisible line between the shadows and the light of the gala. He felt the eyes of the donors on him immediately. Their conversations faltered. Their smiles dipped into looks of confusion, then disapproval. To them, he was a smudge of grime on a polished mirror. "Coach!" Jamal tried again, louder this time. Harrison turned. The laughter died on his face, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged irritation. He didn't see a student. He saw a PR disaster in the making. He saw a reminder of the wrong side of the tracks in front of his $50,000 a year donors. "Walker," Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a dangerous warning. "I thought I made myself clear this afternoon. What are you doing here? This is a private event." I just wanted to talk, Coach," Jamal stammered, his hands shaking in his pockets. "About the shoes. I can't buy new ones yet. My mom, she's working double shifts, but we have bills, and my dad, these were his. I can play better than anyone. Coach, you said I had the best handles. Please don't kick me off. I'll keep the tape clean. Enough." Harrison's voice barked out, silencing the entire entrance. A small crowd of donors gathered, drawn by the spectacle of the confrontation. This was exactly what Harrison wanted, a chance to demonstrate his high standards to the people who signed his checks. He stepped toward Jamal, looming over him once again, but this time the stakes were higher. The public stage magnified the cruelty. "Look at this, everyone," Harrison said, gesturing broadly to the wealthy onlookers with a cider glass. "This is the challenge we face at Lincoln Heights. We strive for excellence. We strive for a brand that reflects success, discipline, and prestige. And then we have this." He pointed his finger at Jamal's feet. "I told this boy he couldn't play in trash. I told him our team is not a soup kitchen. And instead of showing some dignity, instead of working a job or finding a way to meet our standards, he comes here to beg. During our most prestigious night of the year." A woman in a gold sequin dress whispered to her husband, her face twisted in a look of pity that felt like a slap to Jamal's face. "The nerve," someone muttered. "He's ruining the atmosphere." "Listen to me, boy." Harrison leaned in, his eyes burning with a sadistic triumph. "Success doesn't have time for excuses. You think the scouts from Duke or Kentucky want to see a kid in tape? You're a stain on this court. You're a distraction to the players who actually belong here, the ones whose parents actually contribute to this school." He reached out and gripped Jamal's shoulder, his fingers digging into the bone. "You're not just poor, Walker. You're a loser, and losers don't get to stand on my floor. Now, get out of here before I have security drag you across this pavement and dump you in the gutter where those shoes belong." The crowd didn't protest. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the bluntness of the attack, but no one stepped forward. The silence of the wealthy was the loudest sound Jamal had ever heard. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on his life. "But it's the truth," Jamal whispered, tears finally breaking through his defenses, hot and humiliating. "I'm a good player. My dad said, 'Your dad is dead,' and clearly he didn't leave you with much of a legacy if this is the best you can do," Harrison snapped, the words like poisoned daggers. "Now go. You're dismissed. From the team, from this gym, and from my sight. Forever." Harrison turned his back on the boy, instantly shifting back into his charming persona as he addressed the donors. "I apologize for that, everyone. Sometimes you have to trim the weeds to let the garden grow. Shall we head inside? The prime rib is waiting." The crowd followed him, a shimmering wave of silk and wool. leaving Jamal standing alone in the center of the driveway. The light from the gymnasium doors spilled out, illuminating his duct-taped shoes one last time before the heavy oak doors swung shut with a thud that felt like a casket closing. He stood there for a long time, the cold night air biting at his skin, feeling the utter weight of his insignificance. He wasn't a basketball player. He wasn't a student with potential. He was just a kid in trash shoes, rejected by the only world he ever wanted to belong to. The walk away from the Lincoln Heights Athletic Gala was the longest journey of Jamal's life. The vibrant, golden glow of the gymnasium lights faded into the harsh, flickering blue of the street lamps that lined the cracked sidewalks of his neighborhood. Each step felt like a heavy stone being added to a sack he was forced to carry. The silver duct tape on his shoes, now frayed at the edges and caked with the parking lot's grit, made a rhythmic, sticky clicking sound against the pavement. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a loser, just like Harrison had said. But as he reached the corner of 5th and Main, near the rusted gates of the old community court where his father had first taught him to dribble, Jamal stopped. He reached into the hidden pocket of his worn backpack and pulled out a small, tattered leather wallet. Inside, tucked behind a library card and a single $5 bill, was a photograph. It was old, the corners softened by years of being touched, the colors slightly faded into a nostalgic sepia. In the photo, his father, Marcus, was laughing, his arm draped around the shoulder of a towering man. They both looked young, vibrant, and full of a fire that could burn down the world. The man next to his father was a face known to every household in America. A 6-time NBA champion, a global icon, a legend whose silhouette was synonymous with the game itself. Let's call him the captain. They weren't just posing for a fan photo. They were brothers in arms, sweaty and grinning after a game at a summer league camp 20 years ago. He told me to call him if things ever got bad. Jamal. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a ghost from a time when life felt safe. He's a man of his word. He never forgets where he came from. A desperate, wild fire ignited in Jamal's chest. He didn't want the money. He didn't want the fame. He wanted his dignity back. He wanted to prove that he wasn't trash. He turned around. He ran. He didn't care that his lungs burned or that the duct tape was finally beginning to peel away from the soles of his shoes, flapping like broken wings. He sprinted back toward the school, back toward the shimmering lights and the prime rib and the Rolexes. He arrived back at the gala entrance just as Coach Harrison was walking a particularly wealthy donor to his car, a gleaming metallic black Porsche. The donor was laughing at something Harrison had said, a look of total admiration for the great molder of young men on his face. Coach Harrison, please." Jamal gasped, doubling over, his breath coming in ragged, painful gulps. Harrison's face went from a practiced, professional smile to a mask of pure, unadulterated rage in a fraction of a second. He excused himself from the donor and stormed toward Jamal, his hands balled into fists. "I told you to get out of here, you little parasite," Harrison hissed, his voice low but vibrating with the intent to harm. "I should call the police. I should have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. Do you want to spend the night in juvenile hall?" "Wait, look," Jamal cried, thrusting the old photograph toward the coach. His hand was shaking so hard the image was a blur. My dad was Marcus Walker. He was best friends with the captain. Look at the photo, coach. He told me that if I ever needed help, if I was ever in trouble, he's my godfather, coach. I'm not lying." Harrison snatched the photo from Jamal's hand. He glanced at it for a fleeting second. He saw the legendary player, saw the undeniable resemblance to the man standing next to him. But Harrison didn't see a miracle. He saw a threat to his ego. If this kid was telling the truth, if he actually had a connection to that kind of power, then Harrison's public humiliation of him was a catastrophic mistake. And Harrison was a man who never admitted mistakes. He threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a hearty laugh. It was a cruel, mocking cackle that drew the attention of the remaining guests in the driveway. "This," Harrison sneered, flicking the photo with his fingernail. "You think I'm an idiot, Walker? This is a fake. A cheap, photoshopped piece of garbage you probably bought at a flea market or printed off the internet to try and scam your way back onto my court. It's real. My mom has the original negatives. Ask her," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Your mom is a nobody who cleans bedpans for a living," Harrison spat, stepping so close that Jamal could see the broken capillaries in the man's nose. "And you are a delusional liar. People like the captain don't hang out with people from the projects. They don't have godsons who wear duct tape on their feet. You're pathetic. You're so desperate to be someone that you've invented a fantasy world where you're special." Harrison took the photo and, with a slow, deliberate motion, began to tear it. "No!" Jamal lunged for it, but Harrison was too fast, too strong. He ripped the memory of Jamal's father into 4 pieces and dropped them into a nearby trash can filled with discarded champagne napkins and leftover appetizers. "That is where your truth belongs, Walker," Harrison said, his voice cold as ice. "In the garbage. Just like your shoes. Just like your father's legacy. If I see you on this property again, I won't just kick you off the team. I'll make sure your mother loses her job at the clinic. I know the board members there. One phone call, and you're both on the street. Do you understand me?" The threat was the final blow. It was the point of no return. Jamal looked at the trash can, then at the man who stood before him, a man who had just destroyed the only bridge he had to his past and his future. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the gym. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a soul going numb. Jamal didn't cry this time. He didn't beg. He looked at Harrison, really looked at him, and saw the smallness of the man behind the expensive suit and the Rolex. "You're right, coach," Jamal said, his voice eerily calm, hollowed out of all emotion. "Basketball isn't for people like me, because people like me actually care about the game. You just care about the shoes." He turned away. He didn't run this time. He walked, his duct-taped shoes dragging slightly on the asphalt. He didn't look back at the lights, the cars, or the torn pieces of his father's life in the bin. He disappeared into the darkness of the night, a boy who had been told he didn't exist, leaving behind a coach who thought he had won, unaware that the gears of a much larger justice were already beginning to turn. Exactly 60 minutes had passed since the heavy oak doors of the Lincoln Heights Gymnasium had slammed shut on Jamal Walker's dreams. Inside, the gala was at its zenith. The clinking of crystal flutes filled the air, and the scent of slow-roasted prime rib mingled with the expensive perfumes of the city's elite. Coach Harrison was in his element, standing at the head of the main table, holding court. He was regaling a group of wealthy board members with a sanitized version of his tough love philosophy, omitting the part where he threatened a child's mother and destroyed a dead man's memory. "It's about the culture," Harrison said, swirling a glass of vintage, sparkling cider. "If you allow one crack in the foundation, one student who doesn't respect the standards, the whole building collapses. I had to make a difficult call tonight, but it's for the soul of the program." The donors nodded solemnly, their faces reflecting a terrifying mix of ignorance and complicity. Harrison felt invincible. He felt like the king of this polished, gated world. Then, the heavy doors at the back of the hall didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that made the chandeliers rattle. The room went silent instantly. A cold draft from the night air swept through the warm, mahogany-scented hall. Every head turned toward the entrance. 2 figures stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright floodlights of the parking lot. One was small, a boy in a faded jersey and jeans. his feet still encased in the infamous duct-taped sneakers. But he wasn't slumping anymore. He stood tall, his chin up, his eyes fixed on Harrison with a look of terrifying clarity. Beside him stood a man who seemed to swallow all the light in the room. He was a giant, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored black tracksuit that probably cost more than the Porsche parked outside. He didn't need a Rolex to show his status. His face was his currency. It was a face that had been on the cover of Time, Sports Illustrated, and every cereal box in the country for 2 decades. It was the captain. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. People stopped mid-chew. A waiter dropped a tray of hors d'oeuvres, the silver clatter sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. Coach Harrison's glass slipped from his hand. It didn't break. It landed on the thick, plush carpet with a dull thud, spilling cider like a pool of golden blood. His face, which had been a healthy, arrogant red, drained of all color until it was the shade of a bleached bone. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. "See, Captain?" Harrison stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic warble. We didn't expect the gala. We sent an invitation, but your people said..." The captain didn't say a word. He didn't look at the donors. He didn't look at the expensive decorations. He walked down the center aisle of the banquet hall, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. He walked with the grace of a panther and the authority of a king. Jamal walked beside him, his silver-taped shoes clicking on the hardwood floor, a sound that no longer felt like a mark of shame, but like a drumbeat of war. They stopped 5 feet from Harrison's table. The captain looked down at the coach, his expression unreadable, a mask of cold, hard granite. "I'm told there's a problem with the dress code in this gym," the captain said. His voice was a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of everyone present. It wasn't loud, but it filled every cubic inch of the space. Harrison tried to find his voice. He tried to summon the tough persona he used to terrorize 12-year-olds, but it had deserted him. It's just the standards, sir. We try to maintain a certain image for the donors for the school." "Standards?" The captain stepped closer, looming over Harrison. The coach looked like a child next to him. "You're talking to me about standards? I grew up in a house with a dirt floor and a roof that leaked every time it drizzled. I played my first 3 years of organized ball in a pair of hand-me-down boots that were 2 sizes too big and held together by, you guessed it, duct tape." A gasp rippled through the audience. The donors looked at their own shoes, suddenly feeling the weight of their vanity. "But I'm not here to talk about me," the captain continued, his eyes narrowing. "I'm here because of a man named Marcus Walker. Marcus was the brother I never had. When I was a rookie and I didn't have a dime to my name, Marcus shared his meals with me. When I tore my ACL and everyone said I was finished, Marcus sat by my hospital bed for 18 hours a day telling me I was a champion. He was the greatest man I ever knew, and he was the heart of this game." The captain reached into the pocket of his tracksuit and pulled out 4 crumpled, torn pieces of paper. Jamal had retrieved them from the trash. The captain held them out in his massive palm. "Jamal showed me these," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "He told me you called his father's legacy garbage. He told me you threatened his mother's livelihood. He told me you said basketball wasn't for people like him." Harrison opened his mouth to lie, to deflect, to beg. I was misquoted. I was trying to motivate him. It was a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding here," the captain interrupted, "is that you thought you were in charge of this game. You thought the uniform makes the player. You thought the money in this room makes the man." He turned to the crowd of donors, his gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight. "Is this what you're paying for? A man who destroys a child's spirit because of the price of his shoes? Is this the Lincoln Heights standard?" The donors, the same people who had whispered and pointed an hour ago, were now staring at the floor. The woman in the gold sequin dress looked as if she wanted to melt into her chair. The captain looked back at Harrison. The coach was shaking now, a visible, pathetic tremor in his hands. "I came here tonight for 2 reasons, Harrison," the captain said. "First, to tell my godson that he never has to worry about his shoes again. And second, to meet the man who thinks he's too big for the roots of this sport." He leaned in, his face inches from Harrison's. "You're not a coach. You're a bully in an expensive suit, and bullies don't belong on my court." The room remained in a state of absolute shock. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that the air felt charged with electricity. Jamal stood next to the man he had only seen in pictures, looking at his former tormentor. The trash shoes were still on his feet, but for the first time in his life, Jamal felt like he was walking on air. The air in the banquet hall was so thick with tension, it felt as if a single spark would cause the entire room to combust. Coach Harrison, the man who only an hour ago had been the undisputed king of Lincoln Heights, looked like a cornered animal. His expensive charcoal suit, which had once seemed to radiate authority, now looked like a costume, a shroud for a man whose soul had been laid bare and found wanting. "Captain, please," Harrison gasped, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whimper that carried to every corner of the silent hall. He attempted a ghastly, trembling smile, his eyes darting toward the donors as if searching for an ally. I had no idea. You have to understand, I receive so many prank calls, so many people claiming things. I was just trying to protect the integrity of the program. If I had known he was your godson, I would have." "You would have what?" The captain's voice cut through the air like a guillotine. "You would have treated him with basic human decency? You would have looked at his talent instead of his bank account. Is that what you're saying, Harrison? That kindness is a luxury reserved only for the well-connected?" The captain turned away from him with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust, as if Harrison were something foul he had stepped in. He addressed the crowd, his voice booming with the authority of a man who didn't just play the game, but owned the spirit of it. "I've spent the last hour with Jamal's mother, Elena," the captain announced. "I heard about the threats. I heard about the phone calls to the medical board. I heard about how this man used his influence to try and ruin a widow's life because her son had the audacity to be poor in his presence." A murmur of horror rippled through the donors. The woman in the gold sequin dress, who had whispered the nerve earlier, now looked as if she were about to be sick. The hypocrisy in the room was palpable, but the tide had turned with the violence of a tsunami. "Is this the man you want molding your children?" the captain asked, his gaze settling on a silver-haired man at the front table. "Mr. Sterling, the chairman of the school board." Sterling stood up, his face a mask of practiced outrage. He knew which way the wind was blowing, and he wasn't about to let the school's reputation or the potential of a massive donation from the captain sink with Harrison. "Absolutely not," Sterling declared, his voice firm. "Coach Harrison, your behavior is a direct violation of every value Lincoln Heights stands for. Effective immediately, your contract with this school is terminated. You're to clear out your office by midnight. Security will escort you from the premises." The words hit Harrison like physical blows. "You can't do this," he shrieked, his composure finally shattering into a million jagged pieces. "I built this team. I brought in the championships. I'm the reason this gym has those banners." "The banners were won by kids like Jamal," the captain said, stepping forward until he was inches from Harrison. "Kids who worked harder because they had less. You were just a spectator with a whistle." The captain reached out and, with a slow, deliberate motion, gripped the silver whistle hanging around Harrison's neck. With a sharp tug, the lanyard snapped. The captain held the whistle up for a moment, then dropped it onto the floor. Clink! It rolled to a stop near Jamal's duct-taped feet. "You're finished, Harrison," the captain whispered. "In this town, in this state, in this sport. I'll make sure every scout, every athletic director, and every parent knows exactly who you are." Two burly security guards, men who had previously taken orders from Harrison, stepped forward. They didn't show him any of the respect he had demanded from his players. They grabbed him by the arms, the same way Harrison had threatened to have Jamal dragged out, and began to pull him toward the exit. "This is a mistake," Harrison yelled, his voice echoing off the walls as he was hauled away. "I'm a legend. You'll regret this. You can't do this to me." The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off his fading screams. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of shame. It was the silence of a fever breaking. The captain turned to Jamal. He placed a massive, warm hand on the boy's shoulder. "I have one more announcement," the captain said, his voice softening but losing none of its power. "Starting tonight, the Captain's Foundation is partnering with the Walker family. We are launching the Marcus Walker Legacy Fund. We aren't just here to give out shoes. We are here to rebuild this entire program from the ground up." He looked at the stunned teenagers standing at the back of the room, Jamal's teammates. "Tomorrow morning, every student in this school will find a brand new, custom-fitted basketball kit in their locker. Professional-grade shoes, jerseys, and equipment. And it won't be because of who your parents are or what's in your bank account. It'll be because you're ball players. And ball players take care of their own." Suddenly, the room erupted. It started with a single clap from one of the younger donors, then another, until the entire hall was thundering with applause. The teammates who had turned their heads in shame earlier were now cheering, shouting Jamal's name, their faces alight with a mixture of guilt and pure, unbridled joy. Jamal stood in the center of it all. He looked down at his shoes. The silver tape was peeling, the dirt was still there, the holes were still gaping. But he didn't feel poor. He didn't feel like trash. He felt the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder through the captain's grip. He felt the justice that had been served, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. The captain leaned down and whispered in his ear, "Your dad's smiling right now, kid. Now let's go find your mom. We got some shopping to do." As they walked out of the hall, the crowd parted, not in fear, but in reverence. Jamal Walker walked out of that gym a hero, leaving behind the ghost of the boy who had been defined by his shoes and stepping into the light of a future where his only limit was the height of the rim. The lights of the gymnasium eventually dimmed, and the echoes of the applause faded into the quiet of the night. But for those who were in that room, the world had fundamentally shifted. Jamal Walker didn't just walk home that night. He walked into a new life, one where the weight of poverty was no longer a shackle, but a badge of resilience. As we look at Jamal's story, it's easy to focus on the spectacular God from the machine moment, the appearance of an NBA legend, the firing of a corrupt coach, and the sudden influx of wealth and gear. We love these moments because they satisfy our deep, primal craving for justice. We want to see the bully humbled and the underdog elevated. But the true heart of this story isn't found in the $1 million check or the brand new Nike sneakers. The true heart of this story lived in the silver duct tape. It lived in the 3 hours Jamal spent meticulously repairing his father's old shoes. Not because he was delusional, but because he was loyal. It lived in the dignity he maintained when he was being laughed at by a man whose soul was smaller than his own ego. It lived in the courage it took to go back to that gala, not to beg for money, but to defend the memory of his father. Coach Harrison saw trash when he looked at Jamal's feet. He saw a stain on his pristine court. He was so blinded by the price tag of life that he became completely illiterate in the language of character. He represents a trap that many of us fall into, The belief that our standard is defined by what we own rather than who we are. He thought he was teaching the boys how to be winners, but he was actually teaching them how to be hollow. Let this be a reminder to everyone watching. Never judge the journey of soul by the state of its soles. You never know the story behind the person standing in front of you. You don't know whose father's legacy they are carrying in those worn-out shoes. You don't know whose mother is working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. You don't know the battles they fought just to make it to the starting line that you take for granted. Real standards aren't found in the leather of a shoe or the crystal of a watch. They are found in the way you treat people who can do absolutely nothing for you. They are found in the hand you extend to the person everyone else is stepping over. Jamal's father, Marcus, wasn't a legend because he was rich. He was a legend because he was the kind of man a king like the captain would never forget. He invested in people, not things. And that investment paid off in a way that no stock market ever could. So, as you go about your day, ask yourself, are you a Coach Harrison, guarding your sacred spaces from the people you deem unworthy? Or are you a captain, looking past the duct tape to see the champion hidden underneath? Be the person who speaks up when the room is silent. Be the person who sees the value in the trash. Because in the end, the shoes will wear out, the cars will rust, and the money will vanish. All that will remain is the way you made people feel and the legacy of kindness you left behind. Don't just play the game. Respect the struggle. Because the greatest players don't always wear the newest shoes. Sometimes they're the ones holding the world together with nothing but a bit of silver tape and a lot of heart.